South Africa's government announced the state of disaster on March 15, 2020, soon after the first known case of COVID-19 was reported in the country. The restrictions affected several, if not all, businesses, particularly the tourism, service delivery and hospitality sectors. Lockdown restrictions are now to be phased out in 30 days. Some say it is a little too early since the number of infections are still on the high side compared to other countries. But President Cyril Ramaphosa says it is time to rebuild South Africa's economy, and that cannot be done if total lockdown is still in place. South Africa has weathered 4 major waves of coronavirus infections, including some of the earliest known cases of the Omicron variant. South Africa has also recorded more coronavirus cases than any other nation in Africa, 3.7 million since the start of the pandemic, and more than 100,000 virus-related deaths. On the show today, our focus is on South Africa's post-COVID economic recovery. This is Business Edge. I am Lekan Onabanjo, standing in for Tolulokpe Adelere-Balogun. And joining me from Scotland, United Kingdom, is Rosemary Anderson, Chairperson, Federated Hospitality Association of Southern Africa, called Fedhasa. Good morning to you, Rose. Thanks for joining us on the program. Oh, dear me, Rose, we can barely hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
I have unmuted myself.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, we can hear you now. Now, after 2 years, the national state of disaster declared in South Africa in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic officially came to an end this week. Now, how did the declaration help or not help businesses, most especially in South Africa, in this last 2 years?
It has helped. However, we've still got quite a few regulations still in place. So what we really need to do is we need to have all of the regulations removed in order for hospitality and tourism to get back to what it was. So we've still got the 50% occupancy of space with regards to big events and restaurants and things like that. And as you know, most events, if you are just going to say you can only have 50% of the people, or a restaurant, only 50% of the people are allowed there, it isn't financially viable. So we really need our government to actually do away with that too. What we found with the restrictions that our government has put in place, they have caused, obviously it was trying to stop COVID from spreading, but at the same time, it's really, really damaged our economy, and it's increased the number of unemployed people in South Africa. So I think it's going to be a difficult balance between the damage caused by COVID and then the damage caused by the regulations. And at this stage, we are worried that the poverty pandemic is going to be far in excess of the COVID pandemic.
Well, some people have actually said that the restrictions were a bit too extreme because there were limits to the purchase of shoes and clothing, the prevention on the ability to go out or to go for mandatory temperature checks. Now, with the benefits of hindsight, would you say that these steps were absolutely necessary or unnecessary?
No, but I think it's very easy to say things in hindsight, because remember, our government and all the other governments around the world, this was a first for them. They didn't know how to respond. However, in hindsight, it wasn't the correct route to go. In hindsight, the best route would have gone to rather spend all this money that was put on certain restrictions on rather actually gearing up our health services, which then could have benefited in years to come, because, I mean, there are very few countries in the world that have got health services which are exactly the way that you would want them. So would it be better rather to invest in our health services, gear them up, so we could amply cope with all the extra people needing healthcare, and instead of actually damaging the economy, because the economy has been severely damaged, particularly hospitality and tourism, and we've lost many, many hotels, restaurants, and it'll take a long time to ever go back to those numbers.
Well, we are still going to talk about how it has affected the health sector, which you represent, but then the restrictions will be phased out in the next 30 days. And some say that it is a little too early with the number of infections still on the high side when you look at the statistics and the data that is available compared to other countries. Now, do you think Ramaphosa has been too hasty in reopening the economy and lifting the restrictions?
Not at all. And our numbers are not high. If you compare them to Europe and other countries, our numbers are excessively low. Maybe you're comparing them to some other countries in South Africa, but they really are low. And remember, the big thing is that these infections are not translating into the requirement for hospitalization. So even though people are carrying COVID, they are not getting sick. So it's a little bit like the flu. You get flu, but you're not getting excessively sick and having to be hospitalized for it. So I think countries like the UK, for example, where they are realizing you've actually got to live with COVID, it is far more sustainable because there's a really delicate balance between the damage caused by lockdown and the damage caused by COVID. And historians will one day look at this and actually be able to judge countries and see if they in fact cause more damage to humanity by the restrictions than the actual COVID itself would have caused.
Well, talking about sustainability, some of the measures introduced according to the figures that were had through the state of disaster included extension of validity of vehicle and driver's license, relief to small businesses, and social distress relief grants, among others. Those are the initiatives that were brought on board during the course of the declaration of the disaster management on COVID-19. Now, when these era ends, when this is lifted, what do you think would happen to these initiatives? Would you say that they should be sustained, or you think that they should abruptly be brought to an end?
Well, the one initiative with regards to extending driver's licenses, that's not just only a COVID thing. We had a backup problem in that we only had one machine in South Africa that actually printed out our licenses, and that was broken for quite a while because it needs to be repaired overseas. And months went past when no licenses were printed. So that exacerbated the problem. So it would just be the right thing for our government just to extend that, because it's not just COVID, it's also the problem with the broken machine. And then with regards to other benefits, we really didn't have very many. We had something called TERS, which was salaries, a small portion of salaries for people in the hospitality industry. But that has gone a long time ago. We're not able to access that anymore. So then, and there were not really many grants or anything like that any businesses in hospitality were able to benefit from. So in comparison to countries like the UK, there was very, very little on offering for hospitality and tourism. And in fact, what our government really needs to do now is they need to create a platform whereby we can actually get on with what we do best, which is create jobs and add to the economy. So, if you are talking about licenses, for example, within our Department of Transport, we have a division whereby they provide licenses for people who want to become tour operators. That particular department has just fallen apart for all intents and purposes, and it is not due necessarily to COVID. It was actually a problem beforehand. They need to get that type of thing up and running so that people who do want to be entrepreneurs, who do want to start their businesses, can actually get a license and actually do what they do best, and that's take people around our magnificent country. So there are lots of things that government could do. The other thing, which you've been also one of our sister African countries, our government needs to make it easier for people to visit our country. At the moment, we are trying to put in place a visa system which is done differently to what it was done in the past. But for example, an opportunity would be once China does come out of the whole COVID situation, because as you and I know, they're in total lockdown, no one's allowed to leave the country. But when they do, that is a massive new tourism market. They're actually the biggest travelers in the world now. And if we compare ourselves pre-COVID, in South Africa, we had about 95,000 tourists, Chinese tourists a year. In Australia, they get 1.2 Chinese million tourists. But the difference is that Australia made it very easy for them to come to visit their shores. Where South Africa, we've had visa systems in place, which made it very, very difficult. If you were a Chinese person, you'd have to go to Shanghai or Beijing to actually present yourself in person before you could get a visa. And now, hopefully, our government is going to be doing away with that to make it easier for people to visit our shores. And I think as African countries, we really need to work together with that so that when people from outside Africa come to our country, they can literally go between our different countries. We've got a similar platform of visa regulations so that people can actually very easily move between our different wonderful countries in Africa.
Well, you've highlighted a couple of challenges that South Africa has been faced with as regards the COVID-19 pandemic and its after effects. But then looking at it from the standpoint of health and, of course, business, South Africa, of course, was badly hit by the pandemic. But then would you say that the process of recovery has started, especially in terms of getting business back up and running?
It definitely has started. We've seen a big improvement in occupancy. Our hotels are reporting in the 30s, sometimes 40% occupancy, especially hotels in outlying areas, in rural areas, the bush areas, our game ranging, that's doing very well. Some of our restaurants are reporting pre-COVID figures, and some post even better than pre-COVID figures. So there definitely is a positive move, but we just require government to do what they need to do best, and you've got the same in your country, I'm sure too, where they need to supply basic bulk services. So we need a good constant supply of electricity, because that's something that everyone requires when they go and visit a venue, basically electricity. The same with water and sanitation and roads without potholes in. So those are challenges that we face in hospitality. And then also, unfortunately, things that we can't possibly control. And that's, for example, in one of our big provinces, KwaZulu-Natal, we've just had excessive floods there the past 2 days, which really is making recovery very difficult for that province.
Well, I understand your passion and how you've been passionate about what needs to be done in the health sector, because, of course, that's your forte. You get to stay with us a bit anyway. I'll be back with you in a while. Now, 750 days of national state of disaster is about to come to an end in South Africa, that recorded about 3.7 million coronavirus cases, more than any other African country, over 100,000 virus-related deaths, and just over 1/3 of its population fully vaccinated, according to Our World in data. Whether or not it is considered too early, concerns are growing on how President Cyril Ramaphosa hopes to rebuild the economy, regarded as one of the most developed in Africa. But there is more to come on Business Edge, but a break will do for now. Do stay with us. You're watching the Business Edge, and still with me is Rosemary Anderson, Chairperson, Federated Hospitality Association of Southern Africa. And we've been taking a look at South Africa's post-COVID economic recovery. And I'll just get right back to her. Now, Rosemary, a major talking point for the hospitality sector is the 50% maximum capacity at events. Now, how would you say are your members coping with this directive? And is there any timeline where we are hoping to have a full capacity of attendance if this is permitted?
Well, we're hoping very soon. Our president put a 30-day period out where everyone could actually put input with regards to this. And we really hope that that will be removed shortly, because, as you know, very few businesses can operate at 50%. If you just went to a steel company and said, okay, you can only operate at 50%, the whole business is geared up for 100%. So we really need to remove that. Also, if we're wanting to attract all the big conferences and events to South Africa, the international events that we normally host, we really need to get back to 100%. Remember, all of us in Africa, we're competing with all the other countries worldwide. So if you can go to the UK and have a 100% capacity event, you're certainly not going to come to South Africa, where you know you can only sell tickets for 50% of the venue. So that's something that really needs to be done away with. We've also got a new regulation in place which is really harming tourism in our country, and that's that children between the ages of 5 and 12 either have to be vaccinated or have a PCR test when they enter South Africa. And the reason that is a big problem is, first of all, South African children are not even offered that option of having a vaccine at that age. And many other countries are not offered that option. So you might have parents who are vaccinated, but they've got the problem now of obviously they can't get their children vaccinated if their country doesn't offer it. And secondly, then trying to find a place to get a PCR test for their children to get back in or get into South Africa. So we really need that removed urgently too. So we hope when the 30-day period is up, which is going to be in about 20 days' time, we really hope that our government has seen that that is a big problem and they really need to remove it.
Now, one other elephant issue or in the room, of course, is the South Africa's unemployment rate, which is said to be on a high side and, of course, being dented also, of course, by the pandemic. Now, what plans do you think the government has to tackle the issue of unemployment rate in the country? What are those plans do you think should come on board to ensure that people get employed even as the national state of disaster is being lifted?
Our government has spoken for many years about creating jobs. And only recently did our president actually say that he actually looks to business to create jobs. And that's exactly government. That's not their day job to create jobs. Our job is to create jobs. So I think the fact that he said that and finally recognized that, our President Ramaphosa, that is really great news. So all that our government needs to do is to create a platform whereby we can just get on with what we do best. And I alluded to it a bit earlier. We need to have constant supply of electricity. We need to have constant supply of water. We need a constant supply of wastewater facilities. And our roads, we need to be able to drive everywhere safely without damaging your car in a big pothole. And then the other thing, which I also alluded to earlier, was that we need to make it easy for people to come to South Africa. And if we do those things, and the other issue obviously also is crime, to make sure that it's safe to come to South Africa. If we do all of those things, South Africa could be literally the tourism mecca of the world, because our offerings are spectacular. At the moment, tourism, pre-COVID I'm talking now, it contributed about 8.6% to South Africa's GDP. We could quadruple that figure. At the moment, we employ 1.5 million people in our sector. That means we can employ 4 million people in our sector. So there is just so much that could be done. We've already got all the most magnificent offerings in our country. All we need to do is government to do what they should be doing, which is supply consistent bulk services, and that includes safety and security in the country. And then let us get on with what we're doing. Entrepreneurs. If things are going well, they will create business. They will create. The moment you create, your business grows, you create more jobs. So it's just literally, that's what we should be focusing on in our country, creating jobs. And the way to create jobs in our country is to create a platform whereby business wants to invest in the country, because they know they're going to get their bulk services, and there is politically also stability. So that's what the government can do. It's not difficult. They can just let us do what we do best in business, and that's create jobs.
Rosemary, now a recent study by Genesis Analytics shows that more than 50% of credit-worthy adults, 27 million of them, are heavily indebted. Now, would you consider writing off consumer debts for these certain kind of people so as to give them a clean slate even as the economy reopens? Do you think this is visible?
That wouldn't be my forte or my right to say something like that. But obviously, if the money is owed to the banks, it's not likely that they would be doing that. But I think the banks, if you look at their figures, they've done very, very well over this time. So it might not be a bad idea to actually be kind and give some form of concession. And I would particularly say to businesses in hospitality and tourism, who through no fault of their own were not able to operate due to the legislation in place. So businesses, and also the other group of people that could really show some kindness would be landlords, because that's also been very difficult. If you've been told you're not allowed to operate, it's very unlikely that you're able to pay the rental. So there should be some form of consideration, particularly by banks in that sector.
All right, thank you so much, Rosemary Anderson. We appreciate your presence on the show. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Now, according to reports, South African officials will continue to pay out a monthly social relief grant introduced in 2020 to ease the economy effects of the pandemic as the national state of disaster eases off in bits after a declaration of its lifting. Now, South Africans are equally hopeful that this will help the economy recover and get the country back on track. But then we can only wish them well. Let's quickly go on a break, and when it's time, we will bring you NC4 to watch. Do stay with us. Looking at top 4 trending stories in the business world on NC4 to watch, we start by telling you that South Africa home to the world's biggest deposits of a number of minerals, has set an annual target of attracting $900 million of mining exploration expenditure annually by 2025. The target, equivalent to 5% of the annual spending on exploration globally, is expected to kickstart a mining industry that will, among the world's biggest, has stagnated in recent years. And elsewhere, Uganda has said that it is inviting expressions of interest from investors to restart a vast copper mine in the country's west that also holds significant cobalt deposits. The Kilembe mine, which sits on the foothills of the ice-capped Rwenzori Mountains on the border with Democratic Republic of Congo, is estimated by government geologists to contain about 4 million tons of ore, that is 1.98% copper and 0.17% cobalt. Nigeria's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timipre Silva, has said that the April 2023 completion date for the rehabilitation of the Port Harcourt refinery was feasible and that the plant would refine 60,000 barrels of crude by early next year. Speaking on the state of repairs of the facility, which was projected to gulp $1.5 billion, the minister expressed satisfaction at the level of work done. And finally, Egypt's supply ministry has confirmed that it is considering to adding wheat from India this month to 16 other national import origins accepted by its state-gained buyer as it seeks to shore up purchases disrupted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A delegation from Egypt's agriculture ministry is in India looking at phytosanitary measures and examining Indian grains in preparation for the accreditation of India as a wheat import origin. That is according to the Supply Ministry. And that is the end of today's edition of Business Edge. Don't forget that you can visit our social media platforms at News Central TV. You can also download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store and visit our website for more conversations. That is www.newscentral.africa. Until next time, I am Lekan Onabanjo. Enjoy the rest of your day.